into another episode of Oddcast the Podcast and the Dream Achiever series. I get to sit here with my new friend, Jess Erickson. We're about to have a fantastic conversation on self liberation. Jess Erickson is a self liberation coach, somatic healer, and embodiment guide. She helps free from old patterns and habits and ways of being that no longer serve them so that they may return to their authenticity and wholeness. You can find Jess on her Facebook at facebook.com/jess.erickson.coach or on Instagram at jess.erickson.coach. Jess, thank you so much for being with me today. And I'm really
Absolutely.
excited for the thoughts and insights and wisdoms that we're going to share with the audience today. How are you?
Yeah, thank you for asking. I'm excited to be here also. Grateful as well. And I'm well. I'm well and good in this moment.
I'm not looking forward to another bout of winter. Like yesterday and today and the day before, we're in the high 50s, low 60s, and we get
Yeah.
these little glimpses of spring, and then it's like, bam, winter, and you're like, Puxatawny, you.
Yes, these
So
fake spring times almost.
yeah, it's
I
like
actually kind of like the winter. Um,
you're one of the sick ones. No, are you from Colorado?
I pretty much grew up here. I
Me
was
too.
born in California, but I was raised here. There's something about the serenity of winter, although I do admit I don't drive to commute. So,
It helps
yeah.
not having to be on the roads. I
Yes.
used to love the winter as a kid. It meant snow forts and days off and hot cocoa and snowboarding and snowball fights. And winter was all about fun as a kid. And as we get older, it becomes a chore and the heater kicks on and you're like, all I hear is cha-ching, cha-ching, cha-ching. And you're like, I got to drive somewhere. And it's like, driving would be fun in the snow if there weren't other people out there. So
Right. Yes.
winter takes on a whole different meaning as we
So
age
true.
and get
And the shoveling too.
right. I live on the corner of 287 and First Street in
Okay.
Loveland, which is a 3-lane road.
Mm-hmm.
I have an entire city block that I get to shovel. And then the snow plows come and plow 3 lanes of snow back
Oh
onto
no.
my sidewalk. So, yeah,
Oh
winter's
my. Yeah.
plus I've got tons of metal in my body from my motorcycle accident. So, winter isn't always a whole lot of fun. But,
Yeah.
spring is right around the corner. I feel
So
it in
true.
my
Yes.
bones, every
Yes.
cell of my beings, like spring's right there. And
Yes.
my birthday's coming up. So, how about you tell folks a little bit about yourself? You just said that you were pretty much born and raised in Fort Collins, but how did you end up being a self liberation coach? Tell us about you.
Yeah. Um, I in my sometime in my 20s, I just had this calling or this knowing that I was here to help people heal. And when I started realizing that, I was like, oh boy, because that meant that I had to go first. At least I thought so. So that really put me on a personal growth journey. And that journey, of course, had ups and downs and twists and turns. And sometimes I progressed forward, sometimes I went back. But it was really that knowing paired with also just feeling miserable and hating myself and feeling very, very trapped. That kind of drew me and kept me going towards, okay, but how do I actually love myself? How do I feel? Not that I thought about it at the time, but looking back, it was almost like I was craving freedom. It was like, how do I create that? Right? How do I move towards what I want and the way I want to feel? So I would say it was just both of those. Yeah.
What were you doing before you were a self liberation coach?
Yeah. I was doing many things. So I've always been
A
a bit of
jack of all
a,
trades.
yes, a bit of an
Nice.
entrepreneur, artist, things like that. So I worked a lot with people with developmental disabilities. So that was one of my main jobs for probably close to 10 years. Then sprinkled into there, I either sold the things that I crocheted and knitted, or I also started belly dancing during this time. And so then I became a teacher, and later I had
Nice.
my own classes. Created costumes for that, headpieces, kind of festival wear, sold that. So I always had a lot of different, I guess, different little jobs and never really chose that 9 to 5 career path. Um, yeah.
So let's get deep really fast. I want to hear about
Okay.
this transition from hating yourself because that resonates deeply with me. In my teens
Hmm.
and 20s, I attempted suicide multiple times, immense amount of self loathing. And hatred and feeling useless and unlovable, and um, helping other people navigate that and transition those deep-seated feelings of hatred towards ourselves or others is something that I'm really passionate about. Like, I do a lot of work with kids. I speak a lot on suicide and addiction, trying to use
Mm.
my experiences as a way to help other people avoid some of that stuff. But what was it like early on growing up, and where do you think this early self-hatred originated for you?
Mm. Yeah, I think for myself and really many children, if not most, we tend to have this inward sort of turning in or internalizing what the adults around us do or things that happen in our life, right? And so I think that it just probably originated with just feeling unloved when I was younger and just a relationship with one of my parents where I just felt like, yeah, maybe I just wasn't seen, things like that. And so I think that since then, it can be easy, and it was for me to, again, right, internalize that and make that mean something about myself. And also, this is looking through the lens of a child, right? So we don't know any better other than to blame ourselves because as children, if we start to think that, oh, maybe it's something about the adult, that feels very unsafe. So
Mm.
that is why that internalization happens. And now, right, I know that once we begin to have that lens of, oh, there's something wrong with me, I must be unlovable, I must be unworthy of love, then we're going to start to find all of the reasons why that's true. Our brains are going to
Try to
want to prove
support
us.
that limiting
Yeah,
belief.
exactly.
Do you remember what it was, that original moment or that original act that kind of imparted on you
Mm,
this sense of unlovability or the withdrawal or not feeling seen? What was it about the one parent and the interactions in your childhood that kind of in-
yeah.
inoculated you with that?
Yeah, I wouldn't say it was one thing. I think it was just an accumulation of many things. But in um, my lens, there was just loved. There wasn't that sense of being held or being seen by this parent. And yeah, I really couldn't say that there was just one moment. It was just many moments of a feeling of lack. And again, then feeling like, oh, well, there must be something wrong with me because of that.
Yeah, because as children, we're super empathic, but all we can do is feel.
Hmm.
So we can feel withdraw, we can feel disdain, we can feel despondency, but we don't know what that means.
Hmm.
And we don't have the
Hmm.
cognitive rationality to be able to say, oh, my parent just had a rough day, or it's not something I did, that's something that they're going through, or something that I did that's triggering their childhood and the way that
Right.
their parents treated them. I have the cognitive ability to rationalize that. As kids, we just have a feeling. And then we go inside, as to your point,
Hmm.
you said we
Hmm.
internalized this. We make an association to understand the feeling, because there's validity, the feeling is real.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
we try to make it make sense, and we go inside and we program ourselves with all these limiting beliefs. Me personally, it was just a sense of not good enough.
Hmm.
You know, when I was a kid, um, if I got B's, they should have been A's. If I scored one touchdown, it should have been two. If I got an interception, I should have run it back. If I scored a goal
Hmm.
in soccer, I should have scored two. There's always something a little bit better that I could have done. And that imparted on me this sense that no matter what I do, no matter how hard I try, no matter how good I am, it's never
Hmm.
going to be good enough. So, do you feel like a lot of people grow up in environments like this? Because I don't think that you and I are the anomalies.
Right. Well, I mean, it's interesting because the everyone remembers these things differently, right? So to be fair, adults might remember situations differently than we do as a child, right? And so I wouldn't say that it's uncommon for children to grow up and just take different circumstances, different things that are said or done or not said or not done,
Right.
right, to then mean all of these things about ourselves. And so, how common is it? I would say it's probably pretty common, right? Because the circumstances of it doesn't necessarily matter. It's just how the child perceives it.
Right. Do you think there's something that could be done, a class that parents can take
Mm,
earlier on in life, something that kids can learn, maybe in school? Is there anything that can be done to help kind of dull the pain of this sense of inadequacy
mm,
at an earlier stage? Because I don't know about you, but based on this limiting belief that I assumed from my childhood,
mhm,
I resorted to drugs, promiscuity, and self harm. I hated myself, so it ended up hating other people, and that translated across the board through all relationships. And it wasn't until my late 20s, early 30s when I started doing early childhood regression and EMDR and things like that that I
mhm,
began to understand and rationalize where my parents were coming from, and that all of these thoughts and stories that I was telling myself were just that, thoughts and
mhm,
stories, not
mhm,
reality.
mhm.
So is there anything that can be done at an earlier age, whether on behalf of the parents, the teachers, or the kids, that kind of help dull this pain a little quicker?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there are many things that can be done, but what comes to mind, let's start with parents, right, is just being able to process emotions. Like that in and of itself, the ability to be able to process emotions, allow them, and not be reactive to them can be huge,
Mm.
right? Because let's be real, parenting is hard, it's difficult. There's not like a right way to do it, even though we might like to think that there is.
It'd be nice if there's just one book that had it all
Yeah,
encapsulated.
right. And parents are people and they're products of the way that they were raised, also. Right. So I certainly don't want to move into any sort of blaming, but knowing this, right, when parents learn how to process and allow their emotions, it's easier for them to consciously choose how they want to interact with their children, which can be huge. Right. And let's say that a parent did overreact, right? So then you could go to, okay, let's work on some mindset about it. Because if the parents then is also judging themselves for times when they've overreacted, that might create more distance between them and that child, or it might sort of make it a bit more fuzzy or muddy for them to learn from those situations, right? Because it's going to happen. So using mindset to shift from something like self-judgment, if it happens, into curiosity or even like calm or acceptance can really help someone to then improve, if we want to call it that, or more consciously decide how they might want to act or behave next time. So I'd say that for parents. And then for children, I think really honestly kind of the same thing. Like if we were able to help teach children at a young age how to be able to allow their emotions, how to actually do what we call sitting it with their emotions, which many adults are like, I don't even know what that means, right? But again, moving away from reacting and maybe even helping children to see some of the stories that they're creating so that they can learn, oh, maybe it's not because of me. And that would have to be at a certain age where a child was able to understand more. So this might not be able to happen until teenage years. I'm not totally sure, but those are my thoughts on that.
If I'm hearing you correctly, it sounds like what you're advocating for is a great deal of self-awareness, having the ability to take the time to breathe and understand yourself, and then with curiosity kind of ask the hard questions.
Mm-hmm.
Where did this come from? Why did I react this way? How would I like to show up differently in the future? Things like that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And you know what came into mind actually for children also
No, what's
is
that?
is teaching like affect regulation tools and nervous system regulation, right? And that kind of goes along with processing emotions, because otherwise will just tend to feel at the whim of them. But it can be very empowering to learn a simple technique if feeling anxious, overwhelmed, or feeling shut down, to come back to a baseline.
Right.
So I would say also teaching children that could be huge.
It's funny that you say that, because my nonprofit is working on a Fortitude for Youth program
Mm.
with the idea of starting in kindergarten with 30 minutes a day of Qigong, meditation, and yoga. So we're calling fortitude, emotional fortitude, and teaching the tools like intentional breathing, intentional stretching, and intentional energy work, so that they can deregulate, they can get out of that sympathetic nervous system and really be able to navigate and operate from a higher place of integrity and understanding, without, and hopefully doing it preemptively, so the compounded effect of these negative emotions and the negative situations don't build up to the point where they end up medicated or in a treatment facility or committing self-harm or resorting to drugs or things like that.
Right.
So it's really neat that you advocate for that, when that's really a World Empowered's biggest objective for this year, working on getting this as a mainstream curriculum.
Yeah, I mean, it's huge, and it's pretty simple stuff also, right? It's just empowering children to realize that they have some choice in the way that they feel, and that if they're starting to feel, whether it's like fight, flight, or freeze, right, that they're able to actually do something about that. And that helps to not put them on a path of like feeling powerless, or like in my situation, just like trapped, because I didn't know what to do with my emotions. I didn't know what to do to help myself.
And I have a theory that, if I had to guess, I would say roughly 60 to 65, maybe even 70%, depending on the day, of the things that we feel aren't really even ours. There have been so many times in my life, and Qigong in particular has helped me realize this, because clearing the energies that aren't ours helps us realize which thoughts, emotions, and energies are ours. I feel like at least half and upwards of 60 to 70% of the things that we feel and the emotions that we have aren't even ours. So we'll sit down with somebody who's going through a really tough time. They're grieving the loss of a friend or a loved one or something like that. They just went through a breakthrough or whatever. And we'll be there, and we'll be empathetic, and we'll be wide open and vulnerable with them. And we take on some of that energy like a brawny paper towel. We just soak up like a sponge, some of that stuff. And then 2 or 3 days later, we're freaking out. We're having the worst day of our lives. We wake up and we just feel like putting a knife in our eye or something crazy. And we're like, what the hell is going on? I don't even understand where this is coming from. It's 9 a.m. I haven't even had my coffee yet, and I feel like crap. Oh yeah. I spent 5 hours hugging and crying with that friend who just went through that really tough time. Maybe some of what I'm feeling right now isn't even mine. And taking the time to be curious, and then again having the tools to regulate this. All of this stuff is known. It's simple. It's easy to do. These techniques and tools have been around literally for millennia. We know the efficacy, especially of meditation, to decrease our sympathetic nervous system, lower cortisol levels, boost our empathy and ability to feel compassion for others and things like that.
Increase consciousness.
Yeah. So we know these things work. We're just not implementing them. You have any more thoughts around that, and just to deregulate and the importance of it?
No, only to offer that if anyone is interested in learning some of those, I would be happy to share them, so they can reach out in any way, and totally here for that.
Tell them again, besides your email at the bottom, how to reach out to you.
So yeah, you can find me on Facebook by searching facebook.com/jess.erickson.coach, or on Instagram, tag is @jess.erickson.coach. So either way, I'd be happy to share tools with you.
So now let's get into your expertise.
Okay.
What the hell is self-liberation, and why does somebody need a coach to figure it out?
Yeah, well, I don't think that people do necessarily need a coach. So let's not put me out of my job, right? But why would maybe someone want one?
Okay,
right?
Semantics.
Semantics.
Nobody's saying that you need a coach. But what is self-liberation? Let's start there.
Yeah. So self-liberation to me means having the ability to break free of certain patterns, whether that's thought patterns or habits that you're wanting to move away from or that you feel aren't serving you. It's also having the ability to recognize that the past happened, right? To not negate the impact of traumas or whatever circumstances have happened in the past, but also be able to realize, okay, now we're in the present. How is this impacting me now? How can I help myself? How can I move forward from this in the way that I want? So it's really helping someone to, you can almost think of it as becoming the person that they want to be, which I would offer if there is that desire, they're already really that person, but there are certain layers that are covering that person up or that ability for that person within them to be expressed. So it's
Like
really
paradigms, or what do you mean?
what I mean by layers is, again, things that have happened in the past sort of start to cover up who we really are and then our ability to be who we want to be later on in life. Right. So these layers could be certain thought patterns, like certain self-limiting beliefs, if you will.
Like what? What are some of the
Like,
typical ones that you help clients navigate?
yeah, well, the not enoughness comes up a lot. That's a huge one. I think that that's very common for humans, myself included. Other ones are not feeling worthy, right? And we can say there's a feeling of being unworthy, but that also comes with its own limiting beliefs. I'm not worthy of love. In my case, I'm not worthy of love. I'm not worthy of good things in life, right? So those are just some of the examples. Or sometimes for some people, dependent on what they've been through, it might be like, I'll never be able to create what I want. I'll never be able to do it. I'm not capable of it. So these things get layered over who we really are, our authentic self, and then they start to get in the way of who we want to become. So self-liberation in my mind is really being able to like peel back those layers and really find yourself again, and again, be able to leave some of those patterns and habits behind.
Your ability to live authentically without carrying around the weight, the garbage, all the layers of clothing that aren't serving us.
Yes. Yeah. It's almost like we've been wearing this like sweater that doesn't even really fit us well and it's constrictive and it's like really, really itchy, but we just wear it around because we've always worn it and we're not sure how we can just take it off, right? But it's the ability to be able to learn how do we take that off and how do we put on a new outfit that we like more, right? And that's just representative of thoughts, beliefs, feelings.
I'm picturing that lead coat that they make you wear when you're getting x-rays and stuff.
Yes, there you go.
There are times in my life where it felt like a lot more than a scratchy sweater that I was carrying around. It felt like an 80-pound backpack with one of those lead cape things.
Yes. Yeah.
So
I resonate with that.
what are some techniques that you kind of walk your clients through? I know we don't want to give away all the secret sauce, but
yeah.
what are some of the techniques that what's this process like when you sit down with a new client?
Yeah, so there are many techniques I incorporate. One of my favorites is using somatic processing. So somatic processing, yes. So that is processing within the body. So what I specifically mean by that is if we have a certain belief, let's just go with I'm not worthy of love or I'm not worthy of good things. That belief lives somewhere within our bodies. It's coming from a part of us. And what's interesting is we put that part of us and that belief in place in the past at some point when it did serve us to think that for whatever reason, right? Again, if we go back to being children and internalizing because that creates more safety than thinking, oh, maybe there's something wrong with the adult or maybe it's something they're going through.
Or maybe it's something
right?
I did, and if I hang on to this, I can help avoid this pain in the future.
Yeah, it's generally protective. It's like a safety mechanism, right? So we put it in the past. That part of us is still alive within us. You can think of it like that, almost like it has its own consciousness. And this part of you believes that the way to protect you and to keep you safe is to continuously think this thought and to just basically keep you kind of looping or stuck, if you will, in what that thought creates for you. So with somatic work, It's about, okay, where do I feel this thought when I think about it? How can I connect with that part of me? So rather than pushing it away and creating like disintegration, which often leads to us feeling broken when we push these things away, we remember our wholeness, right? We begin to bring in connection and integration with these beliefs, these parts of us that are still wounded. So with somatic work, it's a lot about reintegration, building connection. And then within that, you can do all sorts of things like you might be able to give this part of you a new role. So maybe, well, most often, this part of you is still going to want to protect you, but you can update it. You can give it a new and empowering narrative and ask if it would protect you in a different way. That's going to help you to be more like how you're wanting to be, to move towards your goals, to show up in relationships or the relationship with yourself differently. And yeah, go ahead.
So like the event happened, we build a meaning out of it and compress it into this thing, and then we put it inside us and hang on to it and guard it and protect it so that we can avoid similar circumstances or traumas in the future. And then that becomes like a part of our personality. Like when I was doing EMDR, they did parts work, and we talked about the protector, the critic, the nurturer, the child, the higher authentic self, things like that. So that becomes part of the role of that character. And then if I'm understanding correctly, you help people to sort of see how they can give a new directive to that. Like if it's the critic or the protector or whatever that's kind of fighting for this paradigm that we've held on to, we can give them a new directive and help them serve us more efficiently, or have their serving move us towards what we want rather than away from what we want.
Yep. Yeah. So that's a great way of understanding it. And yeah, there's new roles you can do. There's boundaries. Let's say that you're, in a relationship and the inner child is coming up. There's a way to make connection with that inner child, not make it wrong if it's bringing up certain defense mechanisms or things like that, right? But also to say, hey, this actually isn't a place for a child, and laying down a boundary with it. And what this work does is it works on an unconscious level, because our body is part of our unconscious. Of course, our mind is as well, right? But these parts of us that are believing these things and having these patterns, that's all sort of in the background. It's not like we're consciously aware of it, right? So this is bringing it into consciousness. And when we do that, it will start to rewire our thought patterns and our behaviors at an unconscious level. And then that starts to work its way up.
Do you have any idea or understanding as to why that works that way?
That's such a
Putting
great
you on the
question.
spot. My scientific mind is like, no, I get that. It makes 100% sense. That resonates deeply with me. I feel what you're saying as truth, but why?
Yeah.
Curious.
Why does it? You know what's so funny about this is I know that there are books out there that really explain it, and I'm not a big reader.
Sometimes
I haven't read it.
Sometimes we don't need to know the why. We just need to know that it works. It's like meditation. Right. We don't need to know why meditation grows our cerebellum or things like that. We just need to know that it does.
I mean, a part of it, right, when working with the unconscious is that the body holds a lot of our unconscious patterns and things like that. And so what was I going to say about that? So anytime that we are working with the body and these parts of us, we just are working with the unconscious. Anytime we're bringing to consciousness something that we weren't aware of before, that's just working with the consciousness, right? And then the way that it reintegrates and creates that change, there's things that happen in our brain that when we start to question something or look at something in a different lens or do some of this healing work, I couldn't tell you the exact science about it, but it starts to filter into our conscious awareness also and into our conscious behavior.
And just making the decision that we want to show up in a different way, that the old patterns weren't serving us, that there was a more effective and more useful and more fun way of showing up in the world, having that decision. I love the roots of words. Like decide is a really powerful one. The derivation of the word decide is like ecide. What else ends ecide? Homicide, genocide, suicide. It means to kill something. When you decide something, we cut off the alternative. we kill any other possibilities. But we can also decide that the way that I was showing up is no longer serving us.
Mm-hmm.
And that rewires, I think, on a neural pathway level and gives us a bigger vision of who we want to be, who we're capable of being, which is empowering and exciting and liberating.
Mm-hmm.
So what's the next step to self-liberation? So you do the somatic work and you figure out some of the current paradigms, some of the old belief patterns and where they live, and the processing and understanding the parts work. Take me further down the trail.
Well, this is great because this just goes with my timeline of how I was able to help myself with this and to feel the freedom that I feel now in my life, which is a very beautiful thing. So what came next for me and what I also work with when I'm working with clients is mindset, because I believe that the body has so much wisdom and innate healing capacity. And there's so much that we can do working with the body and somatically on that unconscious level. And we're always going to have a mind. We're always going to have a brain. And this brain of ours is very good at what it does. So if we're looking at the lens of self-limiting beliefs, our brain is going to prove us right because our brains want to be right.
Or if I'm in danger, perceived danger. Or
exactly. You're going to look for all of that evidence. And it's like that confirmation bias, right? Where you don't look for the evidence to the contrary. And so our brains, depending on the lens that we're looking through, and what I mean by that is our thoughts, interpretations, the meanings we give to things. Oh, bless you. Our beliefs. I do have tissues if you want some. So if we're looking through certain lenses, right, our brain is going to go to work proving us right. So that can either be very disempowering and harmful to us, or we can also use our brains for good, if you will. Not that either is good or bad, but for lack of a better word.
I've had some thoughts that were definitely not good.
Right. But yeah, so we can also use our brains to work for us rather than against us.
How?
So we really want to first, again, bring into conscious light what we are thinking, because we have something like 60,000 thoughts in any given day, which is like a huge amount, right? So all of our thoughts aren't actually conscious. They're sort of in the background and they're just running the show. Just like these parts of us are like in our bodies, in the background, underneath the surface, right?
Like an operating system on your phone or your computer.
Yes, exactly, right? And so it's about pulling up the programming, right? In either way, if we're going with that analogy, right? So it's just about bringing to conscious light what is going through our mind, and therefore being able to see how are we creating our emotions with the way that we're thinking, with what we're believing, how we interpret situations. And what that leads to, when we realize that we have the ability to create our emotions, and that many of our emotions, not all of them, but they're coming from the way that we think, right? That's very empowering, because if we just think that our emotions are created and we're sort of at the whim at different circumstances or what people say or do, then what? Right? There's nowhere to go.
We're helpless.
Yes.
Somebody else is always to blame for the way that I feel.
Yes, exactly. And so first off, we bring those thoughts to consciousness, what's going on here, and then noticing how does that make someone feel? How do they act when they're feeling that way? And what are the results that they create from the way that they're thinking, right? So this increases that awareness. So awareness is a huge piece. And then from there, we can do what's called, or you can think of it as like poking holes in these thoughts and these beliefs. So you can imagine it as it's this big balloon that's in your brain, and there's no space to think any other way. It's like, no, this is a fact.
This is reality. This is the
reality.
Truth.
I am unworthy of love. I am not good enough. Right?
I am in danger.
Yes, I can't do it. I've never been able to, right? And so what I mean by poking holes is we just start to question things, right? Like, where did that thought come from? If you could choose anything to think, is that what it would be? What would you want to think, right? How do you want to feel? And it's just a way of like poking these holes in this balloon so it starts to deflate enough so that new thoughts, new beliefs can begin to emerge.
Giving space to a different way of thinking, a different way of being.
Yes, exactly.
Can I share a personal story with me?
Oh, I would love that.
So I spent 3 months in Costa Rica, and about 2 weeks into my trip, the host home provider that I was living with took off
Hmm.
and left me to watch their house. And it was about 45 minutes from the nearest town. I'm in a country where I don't speak the language, I don't know anybody, and I don't know my way around. And it was the rainy season. So most of the time, I was stuck in this house with nothing to do but sit with my negative thoughts. And it got dark. Our problem in this society is that there's always another distraction.
Mm.
We have our phones, we have Netflix, we have friends, we have jobs, we have hobbies, there's so much going on. And when I was there with nothing to do and nothing to think, but to sit with these negative thoughts,
Hmm.
it was rough. I'd always known that I'd had a rough time, that I always had these negative beliefs, but I was always able to counterbalance them by doing something. I could volunteer somewhere, I could donate bone marrow, I could do good on a job or a test or in a hockey game or something like that. There was always something that I could do to kind of push down the other end of the pendulum before it swung way to the other side. And for the first week and a half or week or so of that, sitting with nothing but those negative thoughts, it got really ugly. And then the next week, I got to spend poking holes in it. Okay, so you think you're unlovable, huh? Is that true?
Mm.
Are you really unlovable? Does everybody really hate you? So you think you're ugly. Is that true? Is there anything to call the question any of these? So I went through like thought by thought by thought, all of this negative stuff I had took actually because I had no choice. There's
Hmm.
nothing else I could do but sit there with the stuff. I actually had the time to go through it thought by thought and poke holes in it, and then got to spend some time in rewiring it.
Hmm.
So, what does the rewiring process or reframing process look like when somebody's working with you?
Yeah. So what's really interesting is beautiful is that while in a session, we can absolutely work with intentional thoughts and intentional beliefs, right? But also just simply making the space in your mind and poking those holes will help people in general to just naturally come up with new thoughts and new beliefs. It's almost like they were like waiting in like the background, but there were so many other thoughts that were blocking that from
Mm.
coming up, right? That in just even poking holes and just questioning, that alone creates change internally. And we can also work with reframing. So going back to like, ideally, how would you want to think about this and exploring that? What would be created if you thought this way? How would you feel? What would you do? And it's not so that someone just lives there, right? And is like believing that all the time. Again, it's
Or
just to
fake it till
create
you make it.
awareness. Right.
Right.
Yeah. Because that's actually not going to work.
Not usually, not for long.
Doesn't feel good in the
Mm.
body. So if a belief or let's say even an affirmation, right, doesn't feel believable to you, it's not going to land well in your body. So it's not actually going to be helpful. Um, but yeah, so you can really just explore, okay, if I believe this, how would things be differently? Right.
Mhm.
And then that just opens one up to, again, the awareness, one, that it's possible to choose different thoughts, right? We don't choose the thoughts that just float into our mind. That's not what I'm saying. But when we start to recognize, oh, this is a sentence in my mind, and I choose whether I grab onto it and hold onto it with dear life, or if I just let it go by like a cloud in the sky, right? Easier said than done sometimes. That's for sure.
Especially when we're triggered,
Yes.
when
Yes.
somebody has said or done something that's caused us
Yes.
to react and we're stuck in that fight or flight mode.
Yeah.
It can be very hard.
Yeah. Enter in affect regulation and nervous system regulation,
Yeah.
right? Processing emotions. Again, it's all about creating space in the mind and the body and creating that awareness. That alone is enough for anyone to change and to do it in a way that feels natural without it having to necessarily be a struggle, especially if we can move away from the tendency to be judgmental of what we're thinking and feeling.
Say more. What do you mean about the tendency to be judgmental
Yeah,
about
I
the
was
way we're?
just adding that if someone is wanting to do this work, that it can be easy, right? Because our brains our brains judge things. That's just what brains do. And there's good
Good or
reason
bad,
for it.
right or
Yes.
wrong.
It's kept us alive. It's been part of evolution. Right? But when we judge ourselves for what we believe, any limiting beliefs we have, any interpretations or meanings that we give to things, or the way that we feel about things, it adds a whole nother layer. Right? So it will muddy up our ability to, again, like just like I was talking before with parents reflecting on times that they overreact, if they're judging themselves about that, it's just going to be more difficult to actually learn to grow, to use our imagination, to think about what else is possible. Because that self judgment is almost like a block. It's going to add more, not that I love positive and negative emotion, but let's say more uncomfortable emotion.
Healthy, unhealthy, positive, empowering, disempowering.
Yeah, I
Something
like
like
the
that.
feel goods and the not so feel goods.
I'm really curious because I agree with you 100%. When we judge, we often end up shaming or guilting ourselves. And I'm really curious why that is. Like, why does that judgment lead to shame and guilt, and why that shame and guilt prevents us from living our higher, more authentic self?
Yeah, well, the judgment, right? The act of judging is going to come from whatever we're thinking about our behavior, or just even having these thoughts, right? So that's going to create the feeling of shame or the feeling of guilt. From that, that's what's creating the judgment.
So it does it like give power to the self-limiting belief that we are trying to take away from? Is like shame and guilt that builds, kind of like pumping up that balloon again to reinflate the negative belief? Or what do you think shame and guilt does?
I think it certainly can in some instances. What I think it almost does more, right, if like we are noticing the balloon is there, is it creates even more distance, because now there's like this whole maze of self-judgment to navigate before we're able to access the curiosity and the even ability to witness or observe what we're thinking in a more logical and not such a reactive way. So it just creates more distance to being able to even poke those holes.
How's that feel for you guys? Is that resonating? I hope somebody out there is like, yeah, that's the stuff. That's what I've been looking for. Looking back on your life, it sounds like you've come a really long ways from where you were as a child to now being really solid in your foundation and knowing who you are. What were some of the life lessons, some of the most important things that you learned about yourself and what it takes to be liberated that you can pass on to folks today?
Yeah, I think probably one of my biggest lessons was that I create my emotions and that other people don't. Because when I believed that it was other people and I was in a long-term partnership, right, then it just led me to blaming this other person for my unhappiness. So I think one of my biggest realizations was after that partnership had ended, like, I forget exactly where I was in life. I think this was really truly at the beginning of like my healing journey, where my personal growth just started to take off. But I really became aware of like, oh, okay, I've heard about other people talk about how you're the only one that can create your happiness, but I never understood what that meant. And I got it. It was like a light bulb went off. And so then when I entered into my relationship with my now husband, it's like I knew that. And that was at a time when I was struggling maybe even the most in my entire life, because I had started this healing journey. I had started working with traumas and therapy. I wasn't eating well. I had insomnia. Like I was breaking down. At that time, I was working with people with disabilities and sometimes house cleaning and doing the other arts and stuff I mentioned. but I was literally breaking down in people's houses while I
Mm.
would be cleaning their houses. Thank goodness many people were not home, and I was able to control that enough to not break down, sobbing on my knees when they were home. But that's where I was,
Hmm.
right? So, entering into the relationship that I'm still in now, knowing that I was the only one that could create my happiness, it just helped me to be like, okay, like, how am I going to do this? And don't get me wrong, there was so much self judgment, so much shame around just where I was at. But because I knew that I was the only one that could create my happiness, when my boyfriend at the time, now husband, would be like, oh, but I just want to help make you happy. Like, what can I do? It's not like I was trying to be rude, but I'd just be like, but you can't. Like, thank you. But I know I'm the only one that can do this. Right. And there was something about that knowing and really taking responsibility for where I was at, and no longer like, well, let me be real. I was still blaming it on the past. So that came a little bit later, but no longer expecting that happiness to come from an external source.
Mm.
That was huge for me, because it, again, just having that responsibility and being like, all right, Jess, you want to feel better? You want to love yourself? You want to be happier? Let's go. Let's figure it out. We have no idea how to do it, but let's do it.
Let's get on board.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we always hear about that. Nobody is responsible for our feelings but ourselves. And it's kind of a platitude, right? And I don't think that, yeah, we hear that and it sounds great and it sounds empowering on a surface level, but then you immediately go inside, but so and so said this, so and so did this. They said they were mean to me. They said something and that hurt my feelings. How do you take people from the victim mentality that someone did say or do something hurtful to that they are responsible for their feelings,
Yeah.
empowered mentality? What's that
Yeah.
what did that for two-part question, what did that
Yes.
transition look like for you, and how do you impart that knowing onto your clients?
Yeah. Okay. How did that transition start with me? Gosh, when I take myself, because then it shifted. I didn't get into the mindset work for years after this time period that I'm reflecting on. I think right then I had been doing some somatic work and just following this woman. Her name's Layla Martin, and
Layla
Martin. And she was just, I think it was her that was sharing about this, or maybe I was just reading books on it. So I couldn't really tell you like what made that click for me. But the way that it showed up and the way I would help myself with it is just noting that it wasn't, I guess this did come later as I started gaining more. It was when I started my first coach training, actually. Now it's coming back to me. So it was really learning that I would be able to, that I had the ability to process my emotions, and just the awareness again that it's not necessarily what someone does or says that creates them. Like that just was enough for me to begin exploring that. Then, as I transitioned into the mindset work, I gained a lot more knowledge around it. And I think I was doing a little bit of some of this, but I really learned great techniques to do it better. But what that looks like is, let's say that someone is convinced I'm feeling this way, I'm hurt because of what this person said.
Okay.
Right. The way I would help them is to just get very specific. What exactly did they say without any interpretation? Right. So, not they were yelling, because not everyone would agree that they're yelling. So, what is just the facts of the situation? And then what is it that you made that mean, or how did you interpret it that's then making your feelings hurt, right? Causing you to have hurt feelings.
Okay.
Right. And in doing so, we can also see like, how are they behaving? Because oftentimes when we're like, oh, they're being mean, they're doing this, they're doing that, oftentimes we end up doing the exact same thing back, but we're just projecting it onto this other person.
Right.
So that's really interesting to note. And I do want to be clear, it's not that when people say or do certain things, it doesn't help us to have thoughts that make us feel good. And when people say or do certain things, that is more likely to lead to thoughts or interpretations that are not going to make us feel good.
Naturally.
Right. But it comes back to like, okay, but it's not actually what they are saying or what they are doing. It's what we're believing about it.
The
It's
meaning
the
that we've
meaning, the
attached.
interpretation. Yes.
So then what's the next step? Once you've had that awareness, what's the next step
Yeah.
to reframing? Because that feels like
Yeah.
level one. Like, okay, they said this. This is my interpretation of what they said. This is what I took it to mean. Then what?
Yeah. Well, then what is just really exploring that. Like exploring, why did you make it mean this, or why did you interpret it like this? Where else in your life does this show up? Right. Again, all of that is creating more and more awareness, because the more awareness that we have around why we choose, if we want to call it at that point, because usually people don't know that they can choose their thoughts.
It's pretty reflexive.
Right.
The reaction is pretty quick sometimes.
So why do these thoughts come about? Like, where did it come from? Right? How could it be interpreted different or in a more neutral place? And this isn't to just get us into like rainbows and daisies and let's just be happy and never let anything bother
Kumbaya.
us. No, like this work is more for when someone is showing up and they're like, I want to be happier and I'm not, and they're believing it's because of someone else. It's helping them to take their power back, right? Or if they're wanting to improve, we'll just stick with the topic of relationships. It's again helping, okay, what's everything in your control? Your thoughts, the ones that you choose once you understand that concept and what I mean, as I explained it earlier, the ones you attach to.
The meanings that you put on them.
Yes, exactly. Right? Whether you are able to allow your emotions, right? Or if you're reacting from them. Because try as we might, we can't change other people. Like we can't force them to be different.
Right.
What we can do is look at, again, what is in our control here. And just one person shifting, and if you want to call it the work, right? Doing this type of work, one person doing it in a relationship is all it takes for that relationship to most likely change. Not all the time, but just think of it. If you're beginning to bring into conscious light the way that you make things, what you make things mean, your interpretations, things like that, right? And as you do this, which usually it's kind of looking back on the past, but the more you gain that awareness, the more that in the moment you're like, oh, okay. So my husband's late and we were supposed to hang out. So I see where my brain wants to make this a huge thing and mean all these things like he must not love me.
My time's not
he
important
must not
enough.
be interested anymore, right? Like, oh, I can see it because I've looked back. You know what? All right, he's late. That's it. That's what I'm going to decide it means. Nothing right now.
Or you can
right? If that feels
approach
good.
it with the curiosity. I wonder what's going on. I hope everything's okay. Or maybe he's
exactly.
buying me flowers or something positive versus something disempowering.
Yes. So I would just offer, it's the awareness alone, and then just realizing like, oh, I can make these things more conscious. That's where like that term like choosing your thoughts comes in. Because again, they just float in and out of our mind, but we have the ability to decide which ones to be attached to.
I can totally see how that would have one person's shift in perspective can totally massively irrevocably change the power, the entire dynamic of a relationship.
Yeah.
If we're projecting constantly and then we're reacting and acting out of that projection of hurt and putting that on them, surely it's not going to be a positive environment. It's not going to be uplifting and empowering, and there's probably going to be a lot of volatility. So I can certainly see how just one person can at least start the shift and hopefully lead to, as an example for the other person to take some steps themselves.
The other person's decision, right? But it's going to completely shift our energy and the way that we show up and the way our own tone is and the words that we choose. And if we do, right, it's not about not making requests of our partners. It's just about doing it in a way, maybe from a more neutral place than a place of annoyance, right? Like even that alone can shift someone else's ability to really hear what's being asked of them, to hear that it's important. And the other thing that came to mind too was
it removes
it
removes the sharpness of blame.
Yes.
It's
Right.
hard when someone approaches you with an energy of blame. It feels aggressive. It
Yes.
feels combative. And if you can remove just that one little bit of sharpness from a sense of blame, it gives the other person an
Mhm.
opportunity to show up as you would like them to show up. It sets them up for success.
Yeah.
It empowers them to show up the way that you're hoping that they will show up versus coming at them and saying, why didn't you do this or you did that? And
Right.
whoa,
Because
then it
walls go up or
blows up.
people
Yeah.
shut down,
Mhm.
right? So shifting our energy, like it's not about not asking things from our partners, not wanting them. It's just like, okay, I don't need to like hang my emotional hat, if you will, on whether they follow through. That is up to them. It's also just taking responsibility for how you're having those conversations, the words you say, your tone, your body language. Like,
Right.
where are you coming from? The other thing I was going to say too is let's go back to that analogy of having lenses. So if
Mm.
in a relationship someone has the lens of, oh, he doesn't love me anymore, or like you said, he thinks my time isn't important, right? If that's the lens we're looking for, we're going to again gather all the evidence in the world to prove that right to ourselves. So we want to be right.
Yeah.
So even in just creating awareness of that and being able to poke those holes in it and create a little bit more space, like, okay, maybe, just maybe, he does care about my time. That alone can just shift into our brains looking then for that evidence of like, okay, maybe, right?
Mm.
Oh, well, he did do this, or she, he, they, right? Um, yeah, so it's just so interesting and it's multifaceted.
It's something that I've always been really fascinated with myself is how our perspective creates our reality. The thing that we expect to happen, we always talk about the thing that we expect to happen is usually what happens. And we go in metaphysically and we think, well, is this a law of attraction? We also have a part of our brain called the reticular activating system.
I've never
It's the
heard of
part
that.
of our brain that, like, when we decide, going back to that idea of the root of decide, when we decide something's important, like I want to get a Dodge Ram, or my biological clock is ticking and I'm starting to want to give birth and have children and a family of my own. Suddenly, when we have decided that something is important, like a Dodge Ram or babies, we start seeing Dodge Rams and babies everywhere. That
Mm-hmm.
reticular activating system is kicked on in our brain. So all those things were always there. It's not like new babies are popping up in your life. It's that
Right.
our brain is recognizing that thing is important. And we do the
Yep.
same shit with the negative beliefs that
Oh,
so and
absolutely.
so doesn't care about me, or I'm in danger, or I'm unlovable or unworthy or something like that. That reticular activating system does the same thing with babies and cars as it does with the negative thought patterns and the beliefs. And then we go in and all we're doing all day long is looking for something, like you said, to support that.
Yep.
Oh, so and so did this, or so and so said that, or I didn't like their tone, or blah blah blah, or
Right.
and then yeah.
And it's not even conscious.
No.
That's the interesting thing, right? And when we're doing that and looking through those lenses, it's only like firming that belief up more and more. It's making it even stronger. Like you're going down that road in your brain, right? It's just like making it an even more well trodden path.
Which circles back to fortifying your beliefs. One of the
Mm-hmm.
things that I did when I was working with the Grand Families kids, I created this big diagram and how our beliefs create our thoughts create our actions create our results, and our results tie back into our beliefs. They fortify that pre-existing belief system,
Mm-hmm.
which is what our ego brain wants all the time. See, I was right. I knew it. I was right. Well, maybe there's a different way.
Right. Right. Yeah. And it's, yeah, again, just about that curiosity, right? Maybe there is a different way. Maybe there is something else. And again, it's not about going into like this rainbows and daisies like fantasy land. It's not about um, not being okay with certain things that people do say or do with us, right? But it is just about like, okay, what else could be true? Or how is it that we're wanting to feel or show up in these relationships? And how can we help ourselves move towards that?
Yeah, if someone walks up to you and hits you in the shin with a stick, that hurts. Sometimes things
Right.
happen.
Right. Yes.
We don't always have to go in and internalize it and make some
Right.
big thing
Like,
about how I deserve to get hit in the
yes.
shin or
Like, we don't want to use it against ourselves and suddenly think that we're not allowed to be humans and have our emotions and things like that. Like, sometimes we want to be mad,
maybe it was just
and
some
that's fine.
blind man walking down the street trying to find their way.
Right, right.
Yeah, one of the things I always used to say is that some people just aren't happy unless they're pissed about something. There are a few handful of people that just walk around looking for reasons to be aggravated about something sometime. Having this awareness and making the desire and decision that there's a different way that we want to show up, that our happiness is our responsibility, and that our thoughts and belief patterns lead into that happiness, is really empowering. This
Yeah.
is such a wonderful conversation. As we're getting ready to wrap up here, and my laptop tells me my battery is about to die. If there was one great inoculation, if there's one bit of wisdom that you can just plug into and impart on everybody listening and showing up today, what would that one thing be, Jess?
Oh, it would definitely be how to process emotions. So I
Mm.
could just give a couple step by steps if that is
Yeah,
okay.
of course. Yes,
This has
please.
probably been like one of the most life-changing things for me. So processing emotions, how do you do it? You can just do it by yourself, almost meditative if that feels good. You can also journal about it. I suggest doing it by yourself to start out. And then you'll see that the more and more you build the skill, the more you'll be able to be out and about with people and noticing your emotions and go from like doing the work to process them to allowing them and moving away from being reactive and more consciously deciding how you want to respond. So it's simple. Yeah.
What does that journaling look like? Because we could go into the journal and say so and so did this and they're such a jerk.
Oh,
and
yes, yes, yes.
What
So here are
exactly
the
does that
steps.
journaling look like?
Whether you want to lay down in a quiet space, sit, whatever it is, or journal, you're just going to label the emotion or the feeling in your body, right? What would you call that vibration? Okay, you can even make up a word. It's just to gain awareness again. You could go good or bad, good, bad, whatever, right? So you label it and then you just ask yourself, okay, where am I feeling it? And you locate where you're feeling it in your body. So for some people, it might be, you know what, I feel this rage in my shoulders, or I feel this sadness in my gut, or maybe there's two areas, right? If you're journaling, you're just going to reflect on this and then you're going to journal it out. If you're doing it more like a meditation, you're just going to, you can speak it out loud or just internally, right? You say, okay, I feel it in my chest, right? All right, what does it feel like? Just describe it to yourself. So, what specific sensations are there that lets you know you're feeling sadness or that you're feeling rage? So, for example, maybe there's tingling, right? Maybe there's heaviness. Maybe there's a certain density. Maybe there's bubbles. Maybe there's a pulsing. So, you can also ask as you start, is it moving? Is it still? Is it heavy or is it light? Is it stagnant or does it feel like it's starting to change? Is there a certain color? Is there a temperature? And so, what you're doing here is you're building connection to those emotions. You're learning how to process them, how to be with them, how to sit with them, right? This is what that means. And the more and more that you do this, and add in also, if you're able to and comfortable with it, see if you can welcome the emotion to be here rather than resisting, right? To the best of your ability. And this is so empowering because it helps us to be able to have an emotion and again, not need to react to it and just learn, you know what, even though sadness, anger, irritation, even though those things don't feel good, I can allow them. I can handle it. It makes emotions much less scary. So going back to relationships, if we're less scared of feeling a certain way and know we can process it, we will most likely want to control another person's behavior less, right? Because if we're able to be angry and we know, okay, that's not what he, she, they said, right? It's my meaning, it's my interpretation. I'm still feeling angry though. If we know we can process that, it just gives us so much freedom and space.
Yeah.